David Crystal is a major linguistics expert. He's a major English expert with a list of publication credits much longer than my own. He's also a recognized expert in Shakespeare. His son, Ben Crystal, and he have worked to establish what would the accent of Shakespeare's actors have sounded like. It's really remarkable. I encourage you strongly to check them both out on YouTube. They travel the world talking about English and about Shakespeare. And David has written this book, Think on My Words, exploring Shakespeare's language. There's his name, David Crystal. And I just want to show you one quick thing here. Something he writes about a key concept of mine. We'll get there in just a second. That key concept is false friends. I've been told that I shouldn't be talking about false friends in Elizabethan English because false friends are actually words in two very different languages, totally different languages. For example, the German word gift, G-I-F-T, sure looks like the English word gift, but it doesn't mean a present you give on someone's birthday or something you give for Christmas. It actually means poison. That's a false friend. Another classic example is embarasada in Spanish, which sure looks like embarrassed, but actually means pregnant. I've given those examples on the channel before. Those are false friends in two totally different languages. It just so happens that I think gift in German and gift in English probably don't have a relationship historically, but embarazada and embarrassed in Spanish and English probably do. No matter, they clearly mean different things in these languages. False friends, I'm told, by some more astute King James onlyists out there, shouldn't be used to speak of words within the same language at all. So I was very grateful to have a friend of mine point out this book to me, Think on My Words, Exploring Shakespeare's Language, and to point me to page 156. Actually, he's got several pages on false friends, David Crystal does. It goes to page 161, and he discusses false friends in Shakespeare. And I thought I would just give you an experience of something, some of the argument that David Crystal uses. In between the extremes of lexical familiarity and unfamiliarity, okay? That's exactly what I'm talking about all the time. There are plenty of words. I mean, the vast majority of words in the King James Version are words we still use and still use in the same way that they were used in Elizabethan times. I mean, the word the word and, I mean, those words haven't changed. The word water still refers to the same substance, right? That's lexical familiarity. Then there's lexical unfamiliarity. There are words we know we don't know. I often mention besom and chambering and emerald. You come across those, you know you don't know them. Crystal says in between those categories is another category of word that you find in Shakespeare. Let's see what he says. We find the majority of Shakespeare's difficult words actually in between the familiar and the unfamiliar. Difficult not because they are different in form from the vocabulary we know today, but because they have changed their meaning. In many cases, the meaning change is very slight. Intent means intention. Glass means looking glass. These would rarely cause a problem of understanding. And often the change in meaning, though important, has no real consequence, as when Jack Cade uses the word meat, a false friend that occurs in the King James. Look on me well, I have eat no meat these 5 days, yet come thou and thy 5 men, if I do not leave you all as dead as a doornail, I pray God I may never eat grass more. That is exactly the kind of thing that happens in the King James Version. It happens in Shakespeare because it happens to all Elizabethan language. It happens to any language over time, little changes. And this particular false friend, David Crystal says, has no real consequence. Now, I might quibble a little bit. When it comes to Shakespeare, I have less concern to understand every word. When it comes to the Bible, I do have a concern to understand every word. And even that word meat could cause somebody to misunderstand something. 1 Timothy 4 mentions those who command others to abstain from meats. That's not vegetarianism. It's those who command people to abstain from any certain food. That's the Elizabethan word for food. But I take his point, and I've made the same point that Crystal has made here. There are plenty of false friends that are relatively inconsequential. Even though I never want to misunderstand a Bible word if I can help it, I'm not going to say that it's a massively big deal. Literally every single time someone misunderstands the word coasts in the King James and doesn't realize that it means borders. Sometimes the border is a coast, so there really isn't that big of a difference. But look what else he says. Meat is here being used in the general sense of food, still present in the word sweetmeat, but if we were to interpret it in the modern restricted sense of flesh meat, the effect would not be greatly different. Fine. By contrast, he says there are several hundred cases where the meaning of a given word in Shakespeare has changed so much that it would be highly misleading to read in the modern sense. These are the false friends, faux amis in French, of comparative semantics. Words in a language which seem familiar but are not. The term comes from foreign language teaching, where we often find examples such as French demander. My French pronunciation isn't so great. I hope I got that right. Which does not mean demand, but ask. Demand is translated by requérir. False friends in Shakespeare include naughty. That means wicked in Shakespeare. And isn't that interesting? Superfluity of naughtiness, anyone? Heavy, meaning sorrowful. Isn't that interesting? A foolish son is the heaviness of his mother. This is just coming off the top of my head here. I didn't even write all these down in advance. Humorous, meaning moody. Sad, meaning serious. Ecstasy, meaning madness. Oh, meaning own. Merely, meaning totally. Envious, meaning malicious. Now, what if you had a Dan Hafley of the Shakespeare world who said, okay, fine, David Crystal, now you've taught us these words. Now we can go on using Shakespeare as he is. Because, of course, we would never want to update Shakespeare. How foolish that would be. How sacrilegious. But could you keep track of all these? That's a lot, just this one list. And several of these occur in the King James. Let's get some more wisdom from him. The Duke is humorous. We hear Lebeau say about Duke Frederick and wonder why such a jocular person should be treating Orlando so nastily. Only when we learn that humorous in this context means moody, temperamental, capricious, does the line begin to make some sense. And where would we learn that? We would learn that in the Oxford English Dictionary. The OED pays attention to this sort of thing and will let you know when a given sense of a word is no longer operative in English and likely to cause confusion. In all instances of false friends, we need to pay careful attention to the context. Amen. That's the first step on my road to finding out false friends, to fishing for false friends. It's be alert to possible contextual conflicts. The context usually helps to eliminate the intrusion of the irrelevant modern meaning, but it doesn't always, and that's the key here. And when it comes to Shakespeare, most people who are sitting down to read Shakespeare, if they don't have some helps, some glossary or something, they have some education that will help them. That's not true of everybody reading the Bible. They frequently don't pick up the contextual clues that would point them away from the irrelevant modern meaning. We can see this operating, Crystal says, for example, in King Lear. Our sister's man is certainly miscarried. 'Tis to be doubted, madam. If we were to read in the modern meaning of doubt, it would suggest that Edmund is disagreeing with Regan, but he's not, as the broader context makes clear. We need a different meaning of doubt, that is, fear, suspect. It is a quite frequent usage, occurring in 27 instances across the plays and poems. That's about a fifth of all uses of the verb doubt. Okay, let's pause there. That's exactly the same work I've done in the King James Version. I've counted up not only the number of false friends, meet is one, and coast is another, and study is another, but I've acknowledged that there are instances where those words are still being used in the way that we would use them today, so they wouldn't count as false friends. When Hamlet says, I doubt some foul play, he thinks there will be, not thinks there won't be. That means he fears some foul play. And similarly, when young Arthur reflects on his state, I should be as merry as the day is long, and so I would be here, but that I doubt my uncle practices more harm to me. He believes his uncle will, not won't, harm him. That is a clear false friend. In a number of cases, the old and modern senses of a word were both active in Shakespeare's time. Doubt is a case in point. So is miscarry in the above quotation. This is so interesting. I'm not saying with all these false friends that the word study couldn't mean hit the books, engage in academic research. I'm saying it didn't mean that. In the two instances, 1 Thessalonians 4:11 and 2 Timothy 2:15, which I'm constantly adducing on this channel. In Ecclesiastes, much study is weariness to the flesh. That's clearly the way we use it today. So these false friends often are, this is common with them. You'll find that the word, the sense that we use today still was operative back then, but there was another sense that we don't have today. Doubt and miscarry are good instances of this. Bootless is another. It sounds as if it means without boots, and that was indeed one of its senses, even back in Shakespeare's day. But the more common usage in the plays has the meaning useless, pointless, unsuccessful. It comes from the word boat, which is an Anglo-Saxon word meaning good. The modern word better derives from the same root, and that's really fascinating. When Miranda reminds her father that her earlier questions had been a bootless inquisition, She is not suggesting that she asked without any shoes on. She means simply that her questioning has no results. But both senses are needed to explain the repartee between Hotspur and Glendower. Listen to this. This is so important. I love this. 3 times hath Henry Bolingbroke made head against my power, thrice from the banks of Wye and sandy bottom sown. So have I bent him bootless home, and weather-beaten back. Hotspur. Home without boots, and in foul weather too. How scapes he agues in the devil's name? Here's bootless being used twice in 2 different senses, bootless and without boots. If you do not know that bootless, I certainly didn't know this before picking up this book, even if it was taught to me. It's hard to remember somebody else's English. If you don't know that bootless could mean 2 different things, you're not going to get the joke. People say, why would we update Shakespeare? Here's why. Because playwrights like it when you get their jokes. Do you think Shakespeare would delight in people not getting the jokes because of language change? No, I think he would recognize that some kind of translation or updating effort, and I think updating in this case really is just translation from one version of English to another. I think that's what Shakespeare would want. Crystal says wisely, directors and actors ignore false friends at their philological peril. I love that. There is a famous scene in Twelfth Night when Malvolio falls into the trap laid for him by Sir Toby, Maria, and Fabian. He's reading the letter which he believes to be addressed to him from Olivia and finds part of it written in prose. This section of the letter begins with the instruction, if this fall into thy hands, revolve. It's rare to find a production of the play which respects the meaning of revolve. Most directors and actors pander to the modern meaning. They make the actor look puzzled and then have him affectedly turn around. It gets a good laugh. But it must make Shakespeare revolve turn in his linguistic grave, for revolve did not mean perform a circular motion in Shakespeare's day. That sense developed in English a century later. The OED cites a first usage of 1713. He couldn't have meant that. For Shakespeare, the primary meaning was consider, ponder, meditate. And in this sense, the usage is neologistic. Okay? Actually, Shakespeare is inventing a use for this word, as it happens, inventing a new sense. For Twelfth Night is its first recorded instance. The letter writer is simply saying to Malvolio, think very carefully about what this letter contains. It wouldn't have made a Globe audience laugh at all. It wasn't a joke. So Shakespeare is now, because of language change and because his plays have become sacred rather than, respected in a way, sacred instead of respected. Not only are people not getting jokes that he intended, but they're getting jokes that he didn't intend because of false friends. Same goes with the King James Version, my friends. For anybody who's watched this channel, you know that. The meditative sense of revolve is clearer in 2 other plays, one of which actually predates the OED citation by about a decade. The first known reference to Twelfth Night is on 2nd February 1602, when a law student at Middle Temple referred to a performance he attended. But in Richard III, written in the early 1590s, we find Queen Elizabeth asking Queen Margaret how to curse her enemies. She begins, forbear to sleep the night and fast the day, compare dead happiness with living woe. And a few lines later, she concludes, revolving this will teach thee how to curse. No turning around in circles there. And we have a later example in Cymbeline. Belarius tells Guiderius, and I don't know this play, Arviragus to take themselves off to the top of a hill, and when they get there, you may then revolve what tales I have told you of courts, of princes, of the tricks in war. No circling movement is likely there either. There are still resonances of the meditative sense of revolve in use today. All sorts of ideas revolved in his brain, we can still say. So it would be perfectly possible for linguistically aware actors to convey the right sense by using an expression or gesture to suggest Malvolio turning things over in his mind, and maybe even to squeeze a laugh out of it. Alternatively, I suppose they could quote the young prince in Richard III, God keep me from false friends. I'd love to give more examples. I'll stop there in this video. I thought that was both entertaining and fascinating, and a really important authority that I can appeal to if in the future anybody says, well, you can't say that Elizabethan English contains false friends. Yes, I can. David Crystal did.